The WNBA on ESPN, where people who don't watch basketball talk about basketball. And that's one of the best things about ESPN. You know, the face of sports and the face of basketball on ESPN was caught playing solitaire in the second quarter of the finals. So let's take a listen to this hilarious take.
Best team basketball without Caitlin Clark, and that's because she's like the sun that offense kind of orbits around. The ball is constantly in her hands, which just made their offense extremely easy to guard. Now, without her in the
narrative was set. ESPN claimed the Indiana Fever were actually more dangerous without Caitlin Clark. They aired it to millions, using skewed numbers to suggest her presence was a burden on the team's diversity. But the silence has finally been broken. The reality behind those stats is surfacing, and it reveals a level of manipulation that has the entire basketball world questioning the network's integrity. It wasn't just a bad take, it was a calculated attempt to diminish the most impactful rookie in WNBA history. Now, the truth is coming out, and it's uglier than anyone expected.
The last 3 games of the season, when teams were basically lying down for the Fever, the Mystics hardly played their players, the Lynx played their bench in the first quarter, from the first quarter. Other than the last 3 games, when teams lay down for the Fever, the Indiana Fever were sub 500 without Caitlin Clark. In the playoffs, the Indiana Fever did not play better offensively without Caitlin Clark. They just didn't. If you want to make the argument that the Indiana Fever are were a better defensive team without Caitlin Clark, cool. What we're not doing...
The claim was bold. Without Clark, the ball moved better, and the offense was harder to guard. They pointed to players like Lexi Hull and Aaliyah Boston, suggesting they flourished once they were out of Clark's shadow. They called her the sun that the offense orbits around, implying she was a black hole for productivity. But when you look at the actual tape, a very different story emerges. These weren't just opinions. They were presented as facts, backed by data that simply doesn't exist in the real world of professional basketball metrics.
She is the biggest Caitlin Clark merchant in basketball history. She spent 2 seasons in a row. I understand Unrivaled isn't really basketball. She spent 2 years in a row as last place, dead last in Unrivaled scoring. But let's just look at game log for Lexi Hull. Game log. What year are we in? Is it really not going to let me? Is it really not going to let me look at the game log from other years? Oh my God, it's actually not.
Let's look at the more diverse offense ESPN was praising. Before Caitlin Clark's injury, Lexi Hull was averaging double digits and shooting the lights out. After the narrative shifted, her averages plummeted to single digits. The network claimed the team evolved, but the scoreboard showed a regression. They ignored the fact that Hull is what many call a Clark merchant, someone whose entire offensive utility depends on the massive gravity Clark creates. Without Clark drawing 3 defenders, Hull's open looks vanished instantly, yet the analyst kept talking like she was better off alone.
Of course, the WNBA website barely works. But basically, Lexi Hull she'll admit it herself. She would have been out of the league if it wasn't for Caitlin Clark being drafted to the Fever. Because up until Caitlin Clark was being drafted, Lexi Hull was shooting 18% for her career from 3. 18% for her career. Caitlin Clark, Lexi Hull in the corner of a Caitlin Clark pass is literally her best shot. Kelsey Mitchell, yes. Kelsey Mitchell scored more points because she was allowed to ISO ball. She was allowed to go ISO. Aaliyah Boston's.
Then there is the Aaliyah Boston situation. The pundits suggested Boston became an offensive hub without Clark's interference, but a quick dive into the game logs reveals that Boston's scoring efficiency and point totals actually took a massive hit when Clark wasn't on the floor. Most of Boston's high percentage looks come directly from Clark hitting her in the mid-post or finding her on floaters. When you remove the primary decision maker, Boston has to work twice as hard for half the reward. The diverse offense was really just a desperate scramble for points that rarely materialized.
Admitted herself she didn't do anything. Stephanie White became a reactive coach, as in she had so many new players in that they didn't run any offenses. They winged it. They made it nearly made it to the finals on the power of friendship. They winged it. They didn't run an offense. They went iso ball. They went your turn, my turn. And it just happened that other teams either choked or they got hot. And that's the thing people don't understand about basketball, is that you can out-talent your way to a win if you get hot. You can play bullshit. And if you go your turn, my turn, your players get hot and hit tough shots, you can win a game. You can win a game. If you leave players open, they miss.
The most egregious part of the fake stats exposure involves the team's overall record. ESPN suggested the Fever were a sub-500 team because of Clark's style of play. In reality, the Indiana Fever, with Caitlin Clark on the floor, boasted one of the greatest offensive ratings in the history of the league. Without her, they were barely a competent average team. The network conveniently ignored the stretch where the Fever only lost to championship contenders like the Aces and the Liberty. They framed losses against the best teams in the world as a failure of Clark's individual impact.
Open looks are generated. The Indiana Fever, we literally saw it in preseason. The Indiana Fever went 12 minutes without a half-court field goal without Caitlin Clark on the floor. 12 minutes. Like, Caitlin Clark generates open looks for every single player. There's no player in the league that generates more open looks than Caitlin Clark. And there are situations, and people are like, oh, you know what, Iowa, she kind of didn't take the ball up that much. The difference is that in Iowa, they always got her the ball to end the offense. The Bluter offense was
it gets worse when you look at who they played when they supposedly looked better. During the final games of the season, several teams were essentially laying down. The Mystics and the Lynx were resting starters or playing deep benches. ESPN took these garbage time performances and framed them as a tactical revolution. They failed to mention that against non-playoff teams, the Fever with Clark were undefeated. Without her, they were losing to the Sparks and the Wings. The narrative was built on a foundation of cherry-picked moments and ignored the context of the competition level.
It is statistically incorrect. The Fever were significantly worse with Caitlin off the floor. Caitlin Clark was second in the league in plus-minus. Or third in the league in plus-minus. She was third in the league in plus-minus. Per game, obviously. The Indiana Fever were barely... with Caitlin Clark off the floor, the Indiana Fever were barely competent. But Caitlin Clark on the floor, the Indiana Fever were +6. The Indiana Fever, till 3 games to go when teams started laying down for them, were minus without Caitlin Clark. The Indiana Fever did not lose a single game to a non-playoff team.
Stephanie White's comments added fuel to the fire. She claimed the team had to wing it and rely on the power of friendship to win games without their star. This was framed as a positive coaching adjustment, but in professional sports, winging it is just another word for having no structure. The Fever went 12 full minutes in a preseason game without a single half-court field goal when Clark sat on the bench. That isn't a diverse offense. That is a complete systemic collapse. Yet, the televised narrative made it sound like they were the 2014 Spurs.
Semi-contending team. And then the Aces, the Aces weren't very good. I'm going to be real here. The Mercury, Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier both got injured in the playoffs. The Mercury needed a choke job and a fee injury. The Aces weren't very good last year. They weren't. And again, the 2024 Connecticut Sun dog walked that playoffs. That team was 100 times better than the Phoenix Mercury. Especially after when Satu went down. And the Mercury just choked as well. The Aces, just like in 2023,
The statistics regarding plus-minus are perhaps the most damning evidence against the ESPN narrative. Clark was consistently top 3 in the entire league for plus-minus per game. When she was on the floor, the Fever were outscoring opponents by significant margins. The moment she stepped off, that number flipped into the negatives. How can a team be more dangerous when they are literally losing the minutes their star player is resting? It's a mathematical impossibility that was presented as a legitimate sports debate on national television. Kelsey Mitchell was another player used to justify this false narrative. Yes, Mitchell's raw point totals went up in certain stretches, but it was because she was forced into isolation ball. She was taking contested step-back long twos and burning the shot clock. While she is talented enough to hit those shots, it's not a winning brand of basketball. The data shows Mitchell is actually the second most deadly off-ball threat in the league when she has a playmaker like Clark finding her. ESPN chose to highlight the volume of her scoring rather than the efficiency of the team. The gravity factor is something these analysts completely failed to quantify. Caitlin Clark doesn't just score, she generates more open looks than any other player in the WNBA. Every time she crosses half court, the defense panics. This creates lanes for Aaliyah Boston and wide open corners for Lexi Hull. When you remove that pressure, the defense can sit in their sets and play standard man-to-man. The Fever became predictable and easy to guard, which is the exact opposite of what the ESPN experts were telling the public during their broadcasts. There's a reason this fake stat scandal is blowing up now. Fans are starting to realize that the commentary didn't match the reality of the games they were watching. They saw a team struggle to find a rhythm without their point guard, yet they were being told the team was evolving. It felt like a gaslighting campaign designed to keep Clark from winning unanimous awards. If you can convince the public that her team is better without her, you can strip away the value of her individual historic season. But the basketball world is smarter than they think. Let's talk about the defensive argument, which is the only place the critics had a leg to stand on. Some claimed the Fever were better defensively without Clark. While her defensive rotations are still a work in progress, the offensive drop-off without her was so steep that any defensive gains were completely neutralized. You can't win games by playing slightly better defense if you can't buy a bucket for 12 minutes at a time. The trade-off was a net negative, but the analysts only focused on one side of the ball to make their point and ignore the bigger picture. The controversy also touches on the coaching philosophy of Christy Sides. Her tactic was often described as leaving players open and praying they miss. This worked occasionally, but it wasn't a sustainable strategy. When Clark was on the floor, the offense was so potent that it masked these defensive deficiencies. Without her, the flaws of the coaching staff and the roster were exposed for everyone to see. ESPN tried to flip this reality, suggesting the coaching was the reason for the team's success, while Clark was the obstacle they had to overcome. The silence was finally broken when the deep dive analytics surfaced. Independent scouts began posting the real numbers that showed the Fever's offensive rating plummeted to the bottom of the league the second Clark sat down. These weren't subjective opinions. These were cold, hard facts that contradicted everything being said on the ESPN set. The backlash was immediate. People wanted to know why a major sports network was ignoring the most obvious data points in favor of a narrative that seemed aimed at humbling a rookie who had already proven her worth. Looking at the specific matchups, the Fever's losses without Clark were against teams they should have easily beaten. They lost to the Mystics and the Wings, teams that were struggling to find any identity. Meanwhile, with Clark, they were competing with the Connecticut Sun and pushing the New York Liberty to their limits. The level of competition matters, and by stripping that context away, ESPN was able to manufacture a story that the Fever were harder to guard without their best player. It was a complete fabrication that ignored the strength of schedule entirely. Lexi Hull herself has been vocal about her role, admitting that she might not even be in the league if it wasn't for the opportunities Clark creates. Hull was shooting 18% from three for her career before Clark arrived. With Clark, she became a reliable weapon. To suggest she was better off without that service is not just wrong, it's an insult to the chemistry they've built. The pundits ignored the player's own reality to serve a television segment that needed a controversial hook to get clicks and social media engagement at any cost. The narrative also ignored the physical toll and the tactical focus Clark draws. She is the primary decision maker for a reason. In Iowa, the offense was built entirely around her ability to see the floor. The Fever tried to move her off the ball at times, and the results were disastrous. Kelsey Mitchell is a great scorer, but she isn't a floor general. When the ball is in Mitchell's hands for too long, the offense stagnates into isolation plays. ESPN called this diversity, but basketball experts called it a total lack of direction and offensive flow. We have to wonder why there is such a push to diminish Clark's impact. Is it because she's a rookie coming in and changing the game too fast? Or is it because the establishment isn't ready to admit that one player can shift the gravity of an entire league? Whatever the reason, using fake stats to prove a point is a dangerous game for a major media outlet. It undermines the credibility of the analysts and insults the intelligence of the fans who are actually watching the games every night and understanding the nuances of the performance on the floor. The impact of Clark's silence being broken cannot be overstated. When the star player and those around her start to see the discrepancy between the media portrayal and the locker room reality, it creates a rift. The Fever players know who makes the engine run. They know that without Clark, they are likely a lottery team fighting for survival. Hearing experts tell the world that they are better off without their leader is a slap in the face to the work they've put in to build that chemistry on the court during a record-breaking season of WNBA basketball. Even the playoff performance was misrepresented. The Fever didn't play better offensively in the postseason without Clark's heavy involvement. They struggled against the length and speed of veteran teams. The idea that they were more dangerous fell apart the moment they faced elite defensive schemes that didn't have to worry about Clark's transition passing. The fake stats suggested they were a finals contender without her, but the reality was a first-round exit where their lack of a primary playmaker was painfully obvious to anyone with a high basketball IQ. The network's reliance on Monica McNutt and other analysts to push this narrative has sparked a massive debate about the quality of WNBA coverage. Fans are demanding better analysis that actually looks at the tape instead of just reading box scores without context. The exposure of these fake stats is a turning point for how the league is covered. No longer can the media simply make up a story and expect the fans to follow along blindly. The data is too accessible, and the fans are too smart for those old tactics that used to dominate the sports cycle. As the dust settles, the truth remains. Caitlin Clark is the most transformative force the WNBA has seen in decades. The attempts to diminish her impact through skewed data and biased commentary have failed. The numbers don't lie, even if the people reporting them do. The Fever are a playoff team because of her, and any suggestion otherwise is a rejection of the very evidence we see every time she steps onto the hardwood. The silence has been broken, and the narrative has been reclaimed by the facts that were hidden in the shadows. In the end, this situation serves as a warning to the sports media landscape. In the age of instant information, you cannot hide the truth behind a polished desk and a loud microphone. Caitlin Clark's impact is measurable, visible, and undeniable. As the league continues to grow, it deserves coverage that is as elite as the players on the court. The exposure of this narrative isn't just about one player, it's about the integrity of the game and the respect owed to the athletes who make it great every single day. The world is finally watching.